Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we want to return to the subject of the UGREEN NAS operating system. A little over 3 months ago, I filmed this video that you can see here on screen. This was our review of the beta. That was when the whole crowdfunding campaign was still very much in its money-raising stages, or fundraising, call it what you will, but nonetheless, this was when the software was still very much a beta product. However, now users are receiving their UGREEN NASs, and indeed UGREEN are launching that product on traditional retail. So what I thought we would do today is I'm going to revisit this software. We're going to be looking at just what happened in those 3 months, the good, the bad and the weird. We're going to be looking at support, features, back end, front end that works, and hopefully by the end of this we'll be able to ascertain just what exactly UGREEN have been doing with that time, and is this going to prove a good roadmap for the future. Let's crack on. So before we even get into the software itself, I do think we should touch on, in the last 3 months, how much UGREEN have been boning up when it comes to their online presence around NAS, notwithstanding that the regularity of these NAS updates has been pretty good. We're looking at the update size, the time, the publication. There's a decent number of updates in that period since we did our initial review of the software in beta back in March, April. Alongside that, there's been updates and detailed reports of what they want to do with their roadmap. And again, take those with a pinch of salt. We still don't know what they're going to be doing with those long term and whether they commit to those. The same goes with bug and update fixes, and that comes from user request as well. They've also supplied a large knowledge center, and again, I think a lot of us would agree that we're seeing a lot of similarities here in the layout and the format compared with, say, Synology's knowledge base as well. On top of that, support status pages with regards to individual products. They don't have a lot of products right now in the bank, so obviously this page is largely ceremonial and kind of just a placeholder more than anything, but at the very least they're at least laying out the format that people want to see. Now, they've also rolled out a variety of client applications. We're not going to dig into these too deep. We're going to be focusing a lot more on the NAS software. But as you can see, breaking down into the different categories, we've got the help, the AI search functionality now being built into the universal search. Security Guard, I'll talk about that later on, but it's still, in my mind, very underwhelming. The download center has been retooled. NetDisk Tools is sort of bringing, eventually, a range of cloud mounting and remote NAS mounting tools in. DLA Manager, Virtual Machine Manager, Docker we've already discussed. There's also some new multimedia tools building in for AI powered photo recognition. They've extended some of the tools built into that, along with a media center and a music application there. These, again, there is the scraping and metadata for something like Plex, but I think most users would agree that now you can install Plex via a Docker. This is going to make less users use some of these services. Again, for good or for bad, maybe they'll roll in the Plex out. The same goes when we go to the top when we scroll down. File management applications, text editors, synchronization and backups. Again, this has not seen, in my mind, enough add-ons in its lifespan in those 3 to 4 months. We'll talk about that later on. But at the very least, we are seeing a fairly decent range of apps and tools being integrated here. There's still not as many as you might find on, say, the Synology or QNAP platform, but for a brand that's been around in the kind of Western NAS space for as long as they have, they're doing pretty good when it comes to the range of tools and assets they're putting out there. They've even detailed a lot of the data sharing that's happening and some of the services they've supplied SDKs to. Again, I might be digging through this in a little bit more detail soon, just to find out just what exactly this all comes down to with the sharing. But a lot of these are platforms and are services I found on other NAS brands as well when it comes to the development of certain tools where you just need to use third-party code. But I'll go into more detail on this very, very soon when I dig into it a little bit more. Ultimately, when you look at the support status of pages of, say, Synology and QNAP and how long they support their software, it's all largely the same. Although I would say I am slightly curious about some of these support cutoff dates. 2026, 2027 feels sort of short, I would argue, when we're looking at some of the products rocking out here when their competitors are sometimes doing support on these products for, you know, 3, maybe even 4 times that, depending on the hardware architecture and the CPUs involved. And again, it's good that they've got those privacy, kind of who they're sharing data with, who, what and where, but I think they could extend to be a little bit more detailed about their service disclosures. And again, I know technology is a lot larger, and we are having a bit of a David and Goliath conversation, but still nonetheless, I think this is something that UGREEN are at least showing willing that they're moving towards there. But you didn't come here for the stuffy T&C. You wanted to know about the software innovations and the improvements that have happened in those 3 to 3.5 months. I'll say straight away, some of the back-end improvements are worthy of note. A lot of them security-based, still not as many as I'd like to see. My 2 big requests are still not present here. We'll get to those later on. But when it comes to system utilization and performance, we've now got the option to enable memory compression there in the background. Additionally, when we go into the device settings, we have a greater deal of control over remote port access there and port allocation. Again, pleased to say they did disable Telnet and SSH by default. That was just a beta thing that SSH was disabled. I'm glad that was gone. Also, network settings have been tightened up when we make our way, and we've got a little bit more configuration of what we can do with the network gateways on this. And again, depending on the system you've got having multiple LAN ports, the amount of control is going to be slightly different from system to system. Just a very quick addendum to this video. During the course of reading this video to go out on YouTube today, today being the 9th of July, I noticed this starting to appear over in the East over on Twitter relating to the certificate that's utilized by UGREEN devices for encryption. Now, again, I'm not finding many other references to this right now, even though it kind of came about around 5 days ago. It's really only appeared on a couple of different Twitter threads here, but it is related to the certificate of UGREEN devices effectively being the same one being used in all the systems, opening the door to middleman attacks for users on that local area network. Now, how much of this is going to pertain to be effective to remote access, we're looking into, but it does look like that key is being listed as compromised there. Again, not really finding anything about this here on other Reddits, and I'm going to set up several other devices to check the validity of the claims here being seen on this Twitter post. But I wanted to include this in today's overview 3 months later, because even though this video has been free for Patreon and Ko-Fi users for around about a month or so, the rest of you, now this is going live, this is a developing story right now, but I'll add links to this in the description, and alternatively I will be doing a follow-up video on this just to check just how serious or real this is. Obviously, if it is real, there is an element of concern about this with regard to the encryption on UGREEN NAS devices and just how seriously they've taken that. But I'm adding this here just to let you know this isn't completely off my radar. The ultimate impact of this would be that if on a local area network interception, it would lead to eavesdropping of data packets if decryption of that encryption key is made possible, but also man-in-the-middle attacks where someone could pretend to be the UGREEN encrypted relay target server on that local area network under pretense, thereby intercepting pretty much everything going through that should be completely encrypted by that key in the middle. Again, those are largely the same thing, but a question of scale and how much of this impacts remote access. We're going to have to look into just the validity of this claim before we can really speculate on that. But I wanted to include that in this video because I do think it's very pertinent that this is something coming to our attention now, as 3 months later on the software we're looking into it for this video. But let's return to the original video. And the majority of file services are disabled by default, but SMB is enabled by default. I think a lot of users during the early beta testing of this weren't aware of that, and that did lead to some issues. I would also say stability over SMB has definitely been improved. I remember talking to Frank over at WonderTech about how inconsistent the SMB felt during the early beta stages of the software. That has certainly been improved and tightened up. Even permission controls have been made a little bit clearer and definitely a little bit more granular than they were originally. But I will say again, my 2 big omissions, the thing that I was annoyed were missing in the beta, are still missing. That is 2-factor authentication, 2FA or 2-step or OTP, whatever you want to call it, is still not present here. Something I find particularly jarring. And also, I still am not a huge fan of their security manager. I like that it scans for malware and virus, but let's be realistic. We want to be protected from ransomware. We want to make sure that we don't have vulnerabilities and ports open or weak passwords. This security manager needs to be scanning the system for autoblock, needs to be scanning the system for weak passwords, needs to be scanning for file services and protocols being left on that shouldn't be there, and giving me antivirus It's just not what I want in a NAS there. And that extends, by the way, by going into the file manager. And again, the responsiveness, the indexing has been improved, which I'm really pleased to see. And indeed, indexing services are once again a lot more granular and can be controlled to a greater degree. However, I still can't create a shared folder with encryption. I still can't create a shared area with write once, read many to protect me from the impact of ransomware. These are things people want, and these are modern expectations of a NAS, UGREEN. And I think at your price point, even though it is cheaper for the hardware in the market, I think you really need to double down on services like those. Storage management on the system is largely the same. It has definitely been optimized, I would say. So for example, if I want to go ahead and create a new storage pool, I could create a RAID, but just for now, I'm just going to create a nice basic JBOD, select one of the disks inside this system. I'm not going to perform a test, but I could if I wanted to. Enter the password, and I can just immediately proceed and create that storage pool. And again, it's immediate. I can go into a volume, exactly the same thing, create a BTRFS volume there, click continue, and boom, I've got myself that new volume. It's getting created there in the background. But again, no volume encryption is deemed available. You can't even, I wouldn't expect you to be able to retroactively change that. No brand will allow you to retroactively change an existing volume onto an encrypted volume on the fly. But I would have liked to have had those options during setup there. Hard disk testing and status plans for periodic testing of your drives for health and performance. The numbers are largely the same. I haven't seen a vast improvement. Again, I'm only testing this on the M2 NVMe system there, but again, the storage manager is still very functional. It does what you expect it to do, but again, it's not out of this world. It's pretty, it's user friendly, and if that's what you want, that is what you are going to get here. But again, the lack of worm, the lack of volume encryption, the lack of folder encryption still irk me. Now, the applications and services that have been added, there's a few more than what we saw before. If we go into some of the more home user-friendly ones, we've already talked about photos before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But I will say the AI optimization does feel like it has improved. I would say the text is awful. I think you really do need to sort of work on that UX and some of the GUI elements of the display there, UGREEN. But again, object recognition is pretty good, although it is a little basic. It's not really breaking down much beyond, the top tier. When I know other brands have actually broken down into different animal groups, for example, different food groups, but the object recognition is there. The same with the people recognition there. And again, nice and simple, popping in the names. It's still largely the way it was before, and you can integrate that into the searches as well. And that AI model, we talked about it before, they do have a decent degree of AI models at your disposal in order to catalog those images. Again, I would argue more than any other brand out there, but I do think the user experience and the design could certainly do with a little lick of paint there. The same goes when we look at the music application there. This is going to be for streaming services. You can connect these with third-party streaming services, on your Fire TV, your Roku and stuff using a VLC, MX Player, that sort of thing. And there isn't really much beyond what you're seeing here. There's not a tremendous amount of configuration. It's a nice option to have, but not a lot of users are going to be using this within the browser user experience, and I think most users may be using that mobile app we talked about are going to get the most out of that. Now, moving away, we've gone with the photos, we've gone with the music. What about the video? Well, the video center gives you a couple of options there, notwithstanding the fact that you can stream to a local HDMI output on your system. As you can see, there's the files that we generally use for a lot of our Plex testing there. But when we go into the settings menu, we do have the option to add the movie database there by applying for a TMDB key. It's completely free. You can get that done on the website. They even give you a tutorial, which is quite nice. And the AI recognition, I wasn't able to really make the most of that when it came to the intelligent recognition of content. I think that's still very much early days, but it does show willing there. I'm not going to say this is ever going to rival Plex or even Kodi, but it's still nice that they've integrated it. When metadata is added, of course, from there you're going to be able to, see all that information just like you would in Plex. Lots of background stuff there, but just keep that in mind that you are going to have to take a little bit more time to connect that movie database account. And I would argue there is a little bit more configuration in the back end as well. But nonetheless, at least you've got that option for your media when you're streaming it. And playback of multimedia is very smooth, and transcoding is supported on there as well, depending on the system you choose to use. Now, moving slightly away from those home user stuff, let's go on to something somewhere in the middle. We're going to talk about Docker and Virtual Machine Manager. We've already got Docker images. Docker was integrated before the end of the crowdfunding campaign, I believe. I think it was in the last few days during the fundraising efforts there. And indeed, we've already created ourselves that Plex Media Server container here. We've done a whole detailed guide on how to set it up, how to deploy it, how to get it to index your libraries. But having Docker on here has definitely closed the gap in terms of applications and services, which may not be available on here at the moment. The same goes if you want to take advantage of the Virtual Machine Manager there. The Virtual Machine Manager, I'm not going to say it's going to rival Hyper-V or rival VMware or even rival VirtualBox, but creating a new VM is pretty straightforward, whether it is you're going to be uploading existing images. I've already thrown a Windows and an Ubuntu image on here, and creating that VM nice and easily. If we go ahead and utilize, for example, that Ubuntu image, click Next, say which volume we want it to live on. So if we created multiple, we can do that. Give it a name, say which kind of VM we're going to be running, how many of our cores we want to assign, how much memory, how much storage space, which network, whether we want to assign it a separate network port there or a separate VLAN via a USB, perhaps to attach a physical network connection. And that's really it. Click Done, and that VM is going to be created there in the background. If we were to try to create another one on the Windows side of things, click Next, again, same area. From there, the Advanced tab allows us to assign USB ports if we choose, as well as assign different levels of graphical support on that VM. Again, it will depend heavily on your system and the VM of choice, and there's lots of other configuration options as well. And again, once you've got that VM, deploying it is very, very straightforward. Power it on. Obviously, this is not a preset VM image. This is the OS drive, the OS bootloader SSD. So this would be for an initial installation of Ubuntu on your system. And again, VMs like this are very easy to find online, and it is very quick to deploy those VMs, as you're seeing here on screen, using third-party tools. VNC or perhaps Windows Remote Desktop will allow you to make more of these on that new system you've purchased there. We'll come back to that tab later on. Now, backups and synchronization, as I mentioned earlier on, is an area that I do think UGREEN have taken their foot off the gas a little bit. I'm not suggesting they aren't committed to this platform. I think they are, and I do think they are going to push forward with further expansion in NAS. But I will say the two backup and synchronization offerings to me still feel a little underbaked. If we go to the obvious one, the synchronization and backup tool there, if we look at what's changed since we saw this 3 months ago, we've got that, backup to a UGREEN server, but again, over rsync, not available. Just utilizing proprietary UGREEN connections between the two of them, which isn't bad. If you've got two of them, you've now got a two-step backup strategy there, or technically a one-step, but still would have been nice to have that rsync for simplicity. The same goes, we look at backup and restoration options there, not just synchronization live with a server, but an actual backup target. If we want to back up the NAS, we can use rsync, but we can't use remote UGREEN NAS. Real inconsistent. The same goes when we look at all the different options for restoration and assigning that new backup option. There is retention policies there, they're kind of what you would expect, number of versions overwriting the oldest one. But again, a lot of those kind of NAS to NAS backup options there are still feeling a little bit underbaked and just a little bit free of a lot of the options I want to see. There is, as you can see there at the bottom, tools for client tools for you to utilize, and again, that is where you go to the download center to get the different apps and services. But even we talked about that UGREEN client app for Windows being effectively a portal point, and it's still like that. There isn't a lot of the live synchronization. They have added something, but not a vast amount. And if we go to the other synchronization and backup third-party storage tool, and we have a little look at NetDisk tools there, this is if you want to integrate your storage setup with a cloud platform there and mount it remotely. And unfortunately, the only one currently supported is Microsoft OneDrive. They've not allowed NetDisk support for, say, Google Drive or for Backblaze, stuff like that, which I think does limit the utility of this tool quite significantly. And that's really it when it comes to the apps and services. The foundations are there. I'm definitely going to give them credit for that. And indeed, some of the background tools that I've not really talked about, such as DLNA and UPnP, multimedia streaming there to local devices around your home or even business environment, they're all good to see. There isn't really a surveillance platform integrated, but that's quite a big step for a NAS brand. I think we can't really criticize them for not having such a huge asset in their arsenal of tools. And the tools that are there are good, and the foundations are good, but they just all are in progress. And again, if UGREEN wasn't an enormous company, I wouldn't be coming down so hard on them. If they were a small company, a startup, and they were rolling out a new NAS platform, I wouldn't be so critical, because this would be a lot of SKUs, a lot of irons in the fire to develop at the same time. But they are not a small company, they are huge. And having a lot of applications that span this many services, and a lot of them still feeling a little bit undercooked when the system is now in people's hands, does kind of reek of DLC salesmanship, which I'm not a huge fan of. I still love the system, but I won't say that UGOS has made a substantial leap in the 3 months since I've utilised it. There's been a lot of updates. We've already talked about it. There's been several updates over time, and they have added noteworthy features each time. But just keep in mind, these update numbers here, these do not represent a new add-on of 700 megs each time. This is the same OS with a little more being added on each time. And I know a lot of those are bug fixes and stability, but just keep that in mind, that the numeracy of those updates is not the same as each update bringing something wholly new each time. Stepping away from being unduly harsh, I like their Docker integration. I think it is intuitive, I think it's very user-friendly, and I think it's one of the smoothest integrations of a Docker or container application in general that I've seen for a long time. The virtual machine tool is very, and I do mean exceptionally almost, responsive there. I think the virtual machine tool did a very good job, coming out of nowhere and presumably, built on standard VNC to allow me to run VMs on what is arguably very, very cost-effective but powerful hardware there. I think the storage manager is good. It is responsive, and during my utilization of it, the build time and the synchronization of RAID configurations was very good. Do I wish there was ZFS? Of course I do. But having BTRFS is a good start there. I don't like the lack of two-step authentication. I don't like that security monitor, that security manager doesn't have system-wide network monitoring, and the support tools, although very, very good, and they've done a really good job managing a lot of their databases for help and support, and all of these tabs here at the top that we've discussed, I will say this all feels mostly okay, but not really stand out in the industry right now. It gets them a pass at the door, but for a big brand like UGREEN, I'd like to see something a little bit more impressive. And of course, the task manager is still very, very good and detailed, although lacks a lot of the historical data that we talked about in my last video when we criticized it for not really allowing you to save a lot of the data. Going into a task manager that gives me information from the moment I click it isn't as useful as giving me long-term information in the background and monitoring so I can see what happened 2 minutes ago, 2 hours ago. And the fact that I can't store that information on a small area of disk is annoying. They're clearly listening. They added that memory integration there with the hardware and the power for memory compression to speed up response times on stuff. Just give me log information that I can get into and see live. But I think, in summary, UGOS on the UGREEN NAS systems still feels like a beta. It doesn't feel complete to me. And I know that seems really critical. Let's pop me back on the camera, because I feel like if I'm going to do my Jerry Springer final thought, I might as well be on camera. I think it is a good platform, but it's still in beta. I think there are definitely integrations and modern innovations in NAS in terms of security and file management that are absent here. And if they were a smaller company, I would be less critical, but they're a large company. I think this software needs to do better. It is a very good platform, but it's just not finished yet. Is this software in its current state a good or bad thing to buy one of them? Not necessarily. I think right now, if you're going to integrate with your third-party OS, which I know a lot of you that backed that crowdfunding went ahead and did, the hardware in itself is incredibly robust and well built, but the UGOS is still not finished. And if you are buying this system as a complete hardware software solution and you weren't going to go third-party OS, this may not be for you. But I think for everyone else that just want a nice, easy, smooth entry into NAS, you've got a lot to love here. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.